Hello, Louisiana, and welcome to the Fantasy Roundup on NOLA.com. I'm Zach Ewing. That is Spencer the Guru Urquhart, and we are here for all your fantasy football needs for Week 8 of the NFL season. We are brought to you by Caesars Sportsbook, and we'd like to remind you that you can download the Caesars Sportsbook app now. Can't quite bet in Louisiana, but we're getting there, and we want you to be ready. We got a special promo for you. Go to NOLA.com/Caesars, and you can get a $100 free bet bonus at launch. All you have to do is deposit some money before sports betting goes live. I know there's another bonus that they're working on too. Once we get that live date, we'll have more details about that. But if you want to be ready, be the first in line to bet on sports in Louisiana, go to NOLA.com/Caesars. We'll also put that link in our YouTube page at the bottom. And we would encourage you all to like, comment, and subscribe as well to that YouTube page. So with that being said, let's do the fantasy roundup. Hey, we got through Bye-Mageddon, Spencer. It was a bad week for bye weeks. We had the Chargers, the Cowboys, the Bills, the Vikings, all these teams on byes last week. We got through that. I got through it okay in one league, the other league not so much, but that's sort of how it goes.
Yeah, man, it was pretty good for me overall. You know, like I mentioned in my column, that I had one league where I was just really unfortunate. I had to start Zach Wilson and Le'Veon Bell. It was a super flex league, so there were just some. It was just too much to overcome. But for the most part, you know, I was able to dive deep and find some effective fill-in options there. You know, just try to piece it together and got it done. So it was survived, and now I was ready to get back to having more games. That Bye-Mageddon was brutal.
Yeah, it's not that six teams on bye is exceptional, because that happens every year, at least for a few weeks. But it was the teams with the stars on them. I mean, I have a super flex league where I had Josh Allen, Austin Eckler, Amari Cooper. My other quarterback was Trevor Lawrence, all on bye, and it's like, what are you supposed to do? But nowhere was I quite as bad as Zach Wilson and Le'Veon Bell. That is a facepalm emoji of a moment right there. But hey, you got to do what you got to do. But there were some good performances. And we want to look back at those before we move forward. There is significant fantasy news already for Week 8, so we'll get to that a little bit later. But first, let's look at the top scorers for Week 7, starting with quarterbacks. And we start with a guy who was facing his old team, Matthew Stafford, against the Lions, went off. And then we had Tua Tagovailoa. I don't think he played real well from a real world football perspective, but from a fantasy perspective, he got a couple late touchdowns. I think he threw 4 overall. He killed me in the league where I had all the people on buys. So, hey, it was effective for fantasy owners. And then the other name here, Spencer, would be Joe Burrow, who I don't know if you call it his coming out party, because I think we all knew, especially in Louisiana, that Joe Burrow is pretty good at football. But it was just another week of exceptional performance from the guy, and makes you think he can really be a star going forward.
Right. Yeah, Burrow, man, he was one that helped me out with my Bye-Mageddon situations with Justin Herbert on bye. I have a lot of Herbert shares, so I had Burrow as a backup in some leagues, and he really showed out at a huge game, and just showing that he's not only a QB1 at this point. I feel like he's a legit MVP candidate. He's really turned it on, and at the perfect time, just beat the division rival in Baltimore. And him and Jamar Chase showing that they're unstoppable right now. I'm buying in, and then Tua, you know, that's one of those deals to where he's not a permanent solution, but he had a good matchup against Atlanta, took advantage of it. So he's not someone that you can count on every week, but he makes for a nice streaming option for sure.
Absolutely, and that was one of your suggestions last week. Go get Tua. He comes through with 26 points, so a good spot there if you followed the guru last week. I have a little bit of seller's remorse on Joe Burrow. I have to say I have one league where I had him and Joe Mixon and Jamar Chase, and I thought, man, I can't rely on the Bengals offense that much, because if they tank, I'm in big trouble. And so I traded Burrow, which of those three, I guess that's the guy you'd want to trade. But I feel like a little, and I got Derek Carr for him, so it's worked out okay. Derek Carr's having a nice season too. But man, when Burrow hooks up with Chase, you just think, man, I could be doubling up here.
Right. Yeah, that would have been. It's. I usually don't like having too many guys from one single offense. So while Burrow could be an elite top 5 quarterback, I think he made the right call. I mean, Carr's looking like a QB1 as well, especially now that Gruden's out of there.
Who would have thought that Gruden's this QB whisperer and him leaving is what, Derek Carr, Jim Jerry makes fun of me of this. He did on yesterday on Odds and Ends because I'm friends with the Carr family. They're from Bakersfield where I worked before. But I legitimately think, and the numbers back me up on this, Derek Carr is, if not an elite quarterback, he's right in the very next tier. He just hasn't had a very good team around him. And now we're seeing what happens when he does have a pretty good team. They're 5-2 and headed into their bye week. So that's working out well for the Raiders and for fantasy owners of Derek Carr. A familiar name is atop the running back scorers list from last week, and that is the Saints' Alvin Kamara, who almost more of a receiver than he was a running back, Spencer.
Yeah, most definitely. 10 catches. It was really nice to see him getting involved in the passing game. It was something that had a solid year, but it was something that's been lacking with the Saints getting him involved there. And it was kind of puzzling considering the lack of receivers. But I think this week with Deontay Harris out, it pretty much forced Sean Payton's hand. They had to get AK involved as a receiver, and that's what carried the Saints to victory. I mean, he was the whole offense in what was overall an ugly game on both sides. But, yeah, he parlayed that into a huge day and ended up pacing the running back position that has a lot of not so familiar faces here in this top five.
It was a waiver wire special, man. I mean, DeAndre Swift not on the waiver wire and probably not Damian Harris either. But the Patriots situation was so interesting. And you've harped on this before where it's so hard to deal with Bill Belichick's running back room because you never know who he's going to select. Ramandre Stevenson was a pretty popular waiver wire guy or a guy people were using as a bye week fill-in last week. And then all of a sudden, an hour before game time, you find out Stevenson is a healthy scratch. And so, number one, that elevates Damian Harris. And number two, it opens the opportunity for somebody else. And you see a Brandon Bolden. And now the Patriots have two of the top five guys, and neither one of them is Ramandre Stevenson.
Right, yeah. I was thinking that Stevenson could have a pretty good game behind Harris, being that they were facing the Jets, who I think are the league's worst run defense. They're either last or near last. So it makes sense that Harris went off. He was a must start this week, but it was crazy to see Bolden finish top five. I mean, he was a guy that, in PPR leagues, he's done really well, filled the James White role. And also J.J. Taylor got a couple of late touchdowns in garbage time. So from Stevenson's point of view, he's probably like, man, I don't know why y'all scratched me. I could have gotten in on this fun, but it was, as I said, you never know with Belichick, man. Bill Belichick is the most frustrating coach for fantasy owners, especially when it comes to running backs, because I don't know what his logic is exactly, but he seems like he just always he does what you're not expecting. He always goes against the grain. I guess that's his strategy. He tries to throw the opponent off, and it's usually pretty effective. I mean, they steamrolled the Jets, so you can't argue with it too much. It's just from a fantasy perspective, it's like, come on, Bill, throw us a bone. Like, you just never know.
I don't think he's doing it to screw fantasy owners, but sometimes you wonder with Belichick. But I mean, you're right, it's effective. And then the fourth name on that list, of course, we'll talk more about him in a minute, but Ernest Johnson was an absolute savior, not only for the Browns, but for some fantasy owners on Thursday night. He had a great night. So that's your top five running back list. Moving on to wide receivers, and the top name here, I mean, this guy has become a legitimate superstar. Not only was he the top scorer at any position by more than 3 points this week, but Cooper Kupp is the number one scoring wide receiver by a big margin now, too, in fantasy football. And so Cooper Kupp just has become, again, you talk about remorse. I got sniped by him by another owner in a draft, took Cooper Kupp right before I wanted him. I ended up with Amari Cooper. Team would be so much better with Cooper Kupp. And then, of course, Jamar Chase becoming a superstar in his own right.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned the Kupp versus Amari Cooper thing, because I was in a league where I had that dilemma, like, who do I draft, Amari Cooper or Cooper Kupp? I'd initially had Amari Cooper ahead in my rankings, but I pivoted on draft day and went with Cooper Kupp. I was like, I good gut feeling here with Matthew Stafford. And yeah, I'm glad I pivoted, because he's not only been better than Amari Cooper, he's been better than any other wide receiver. And Chase, man, I'm glad I got a lot of Chase too, because he's somebody that's, as I mentioned him earlier with Burrow, they've got the LSU connection going on. It's like they haven't missed a beat. I mean, Chase, he opted out last year. He should have just going in the draft, although he may not have gotten drafted to the Bengals. It worked out to where he, got to link back up with Burrow, which is great to see. They just get it done. He's become arguably a top 5 receiver, and then none of the other names on here too surprising. Nice to see A.J. Brown bouncing back. He's looking like he's back to his old self.
Now, it's interesting. I mean, on a Buymageddon, you still got 5 big names on that wide receiver list. We talk about the Bengals offense and how good they've been. They also had the top scoring tight end. Joe Mixon got a touchdown. There was something for everybody in the Bengals offense. But C.J. Uzomah, the top scoring tight end in Week 7, did he catch 2 touchdown passes? It was at least 1. And then the other names, two touchdown passes. And then the names to point out here, Foster Moreau, shout out again to LSU, filling in for Darren Waller, and with Waller hurt and George Kittle hurt and Travis Kelce was underwhelming. We'll talk more about the Chiefs, but the entire Chiefs offense is a question mark right now. I mean, Foster Moreau fills in. The tight end depth is all of a sudden back in fantasy football. Robert Tonyan gets back on the touchdown board. And then the name to point out here, Kyle Pitts, who may be on his way to a tight end number 1 finish this season if he keeps going like this.
Oh, yeah. He's definitely asserted himself as a top 5 option. I'd say Pitts, man. He's an elite talent. He's showing what he's made of. I think at this point he might be a more reliable fantasy option than Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley off to a slow start there in Atlanta, a new offense, not treating him too well. But yeah, Pitts has looked like he's picked up that Julio Jones role at being the target hog. So yeah, I feel really good about him moving forward. And Mike Gesicki's been really consistent lately. He's looking like he's locked in as a tight end 1 moving forward. I know he's a guy that in that Dolphins system it's not the flashiest offense, but he's had a quietly productive year and has been a pretty steady option at tight end in what's normally a real volatile position.
So those are our top scorers for Week 7 here on the Fantasy Roundup. That's Spencer the Guru. I'm Zach Ewing. You are here with us on bet.nola.com. We're brought to you by Caesars Sportsbook. And as we do every week before we move on to Week 8, and we do have some big news fantasy-wise for Week 8, let's pick MVPs for Week 7. Spencer, who was your fantasy star for the week?
Yeah, I got to go with Alvin Kamara. He got it done for me last night. And it wasn't like a huge Monday night miracle. It was a deal where as long as he got his projection, I'd be okay. But he actually exceeded his projection here and led all running backs with almost 34 points. And it was just, I had to shout him out because he really put in work as a receiver, which is great for PPR leagues. And he didn't have to be super efficient on the ground. He just racked up those catches of over 100 yards, 179 yards from scrimmage. Just did it all last night. It was fun to watch.
I mean, he's been very consistent this year, but he hadn't had that one game where he really popped off. He actually did have one bad game. I think it was against Carolina. He had the bad game in Week 2, but has been pretty consistent other than that. But 30 touches for a running back, I mean, you're going to take that every day of the week, especially one as talented as Alvin Kamara. So a good pick there. I thought about going with Cooper Kupp, who was the high scorer. It's always easy to take the high scorer. But I went a different direction, and let's spend a second on Ernest Johnson and give him a gold star here. I mean, you're talking about a Browns team that was without Nick Chubb. They were without Kareem Hunt. They were without Baker Mayfield. They were without Odell Beckham. They didn't have anybody on offense, facing a pretty tough Broncos defense on Thursday night. And here's a guy in Ernest Johnson out of South Florida. He was owned in less than 1% of leagues across the ESPN empire. Well, a lot of people told you to pick him up, and 69.5% of you did. And so he was up over 70% ownership. And boy, if you it's always a little bit risky to pick a guy up for a Thursday game because you don't know exactly what your options are going to be, and you hate to use up a spot that early if you're not sure. And look at what Ernest Johnson did, man. He was seven yards per touch. He got into the end zone. He had 168 yards all-purpose, 24.8 fantasy points. I mean, and if you watch that Thursday night game, I mean, he was a man possessed. He was finishing runs, yards after contact, fighting through problems with blocks, those sorts of I mean, I really think the guy earned himself some playing time going forward, even when Chubb and or Kareem Hunt come back.
Yeah, he was really fun to watch there. Well, it was overall a pretty boring Thursday game. You know, it's kind of like Kamara last night. He was their whole offense. So it was cool to see him do well. I had a league where I needed a fill-in for Chubb and, of course, all the bye week guys. I think it was James Robinson. So I was like, man, I need help here. And I picked up the Ernest, and he delivered. You know, he's definitely a worthy MVP this week, considering that he was irrelevant prior. Like, it was Chubb and Hunt in front of him. But, yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he gets a little more playing time moving forward.
I kind of like that. Ernest delivers. We'll see if he has a chance to do that more often. So that is our Week 7 recap here on the Fantasy Roundup. We want to move forward to Week 8. And first things first, some big news came out yesterday that Packers star receiver Devonte Adams, who was the consensus number 1 wide receiver coming into the season, and I think is sitting at wide receiver 3. I mean, he's basically lived up to expectations. He has COVID-19. He's on the COVID list. He is vaccinated, reportedly, but even when you're vaccinated, you have to have 2 negative tests 24 hours apart. That is the NFL's criteria for coming back. And the Packers play Thursday night this week, Spencer. So it's a pretty good chance that he will not come back. And then today, we got word that Allen Lazard, who all of a sudden, I mean, we had prepared a show saying Allen Lazard was going to be our number 1 pickup of the week. Go get him, because Aaron Rodgers seems to have some chemistry with him, and now Adams is out, so Lazard's going to fill in. Allen Lazard's on the COVID list today. So the Packers are dealing with a bit of an outbreak, and it's kind of a mess with the Thursday game.
Oh, it's brutal, man. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers, he's going to be in for a rough one potentially, because that Cardinals defense, with J.J. Watt leading the charge there, that's a ferocious front. I mean, if he doesn't have his top 2 weapons, it could be tough for him. You know, he's been really good ever since that disaster in Week 1 against the Saints. But yeah, this Thursday night quick turnaround without his top weapons, he might have to be relying upon his old friend Randall Cobb, who I'm sure we'll get to later on.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. He does get Marquez Valdez-Scantling back. It might be a heavy Aaron Jones
that could
game.
Be interesting.
A.J. Dillon maybe gets in on the act a little more than usual because they want to run the ball more. I don't know. We're going to talk more about this in At the Book on Thursday, as from a betting perspective, because the Packers are 6-point underdogs here. And listen, I know Devonte Adams is a great player, but that line moved 2.5 points, which is a huge movement for a wide receiver. So we'll talk more about that Thursday, but from a fantasy perspective, we're here to help, and we have some waiver targets, and including a few wide receivers who, if you are a Devonte Adams owner, as I am in my 2 big money leagues, what can we do, Spencer? Who are some of the guys on the waiver wire that you recommend this week?
Yeah, I say the start, I got to go with, if you need a quarterback, Daniel Jones. Danny Dimes is a great matchup this week against the Chiefs, who they've been exploited, you know, by the quarterbacks all throughout the year. They've just it's been rough on them. And they got a lot of weapons potentially back for Jones this week. You know, Kadarius Toney, Saquon Barkley may be back. So, and I think there's a good chance they will be, because Monday, you know, they get that extra day. So, you know, as they take advantage of the matchup there, if you need a quarterback, Jones be a nice streamer. And Kenneth Gainwell I like as well. He's somebody with Miles Sanders likely out. He should be the lead back this week for the Eagles, and has PPR upside. He does well as a receiver. So assuming Sanders is out, Gainwell's a nice pickup. Even if you know, Sanders does play, I still think Gainwell could be a decent bench stash there in an Eagles offense that's not super fantasy friendly, but is on the rise somewhat with Jalen Hurts. And then Rashad Bateman. This is one I've really been pounding the table for. Ravens rookie receiver. He's had a solid game last week. You know, he's getting back in the swing of things, back healthy. And somebody that, with the Ravens throwing more, I feel like Lamar Jackson is going to really start targeting a lot moving forward. So get on this train before it leaves the station, because you won't want to get left behind if you want to need a receiver upgrade there with Bateman.
Yeah, that's one I don't really understand. We talked about him last week. You mentioned him. We had him as a waiver wire target, but he went from 20% ownership to 19% ownership this week. So I don't know. Rashad Bateman had 80 yards, and he only had, I think, 4 targets. I mean, he's probably going to get even more targets going forward. The guy's very talented, a run-after-catch type guy, can bust some big plays. I would certainly pick up Rashad Bateman if he is available in your league. Some of my waiver wire targets, Again, we talked about Randall Cobb. He's only owned in 14% of leagues. He hasn't been really heavily involved in the Packers offense. And that's why I hesitate just a little bit. But you got to think without Devonte Adams, without Allen Lazard, you got to go somewhere if you're Aaron Rodgers, and it can't be all Aaron Jones. And so Randall Cobb, worthy of a pickup if you need a receiver, and maybe even if you don't. Another guy you could look after is Khalif Raymond. He's really operating right now because of injuries and just because they're not very deep, frankly, as the Lions' number one wide receiver right now. And he's only owned in 6% of leagues. And so are the Lions great? No. Is their offense great? No. Is Jared Goff great? No. But he's their number one target, and they're going to be behind, and he's going to throw. And then my last suggestion here this week, this one's interesting, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Spencer. And I know we have a question in the comments as well, but let's talk about Desean Watson just for a second. Desean Watson, obviously very well publicized, off-field problems. This is not a moral judgment on the man because he's at some point going to face punishment for what he has done. But from a fantasy football perspective, if you think Desean Watson can help you, and this is probably for deeper leagues or for super flex leagues, maybe if you had a quarterback injury, you are a Russell Wilson owner and you're seeking a quarterback, I think Desean Watson's worth a bench spot this week, and I'll tell you why. The trade deadline in the NFL is November 2nd. That's next Tuesday. That's waiver wire day in most fantasy leagues, right? So by next week, we'll either know where he's going or it will be all over the news and everyone's going to want to pick him up. But I say go for it this week. Strike well. No one else is paying attention. Get Desean Watson because he could be a league winner for you. If that's your hole, if you're a Russell Wilson owner, you're not sure when he's going to come back. It's a super flex league. If he does get traded and if he is not suspended or put on the commissioner's exempt list, and I understand it's a risk, it's a little bit of a lotto ticket, but if you have that bench spot, add him this week, wait a week, see what happens, and then if he's not traded or if he's suspended, you just drop him. All you lost was a bench spot for 1 week, and the reward could be very great, Spencer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I say lotto ticket. Yeah, that's like the perfect way to describe it because he's a guy that it could just end up nothing, or if it's a boom, then you get a QB1 out of it. So I feel like for super flex, it's one of those things. It's like it's not like you obviously don't really want to add him, being that he had a lot of legal issues hanging over him. But I mean, it's one of those deals to where it's like, hey, it's for fantasy. It's like someone else is going to get him if you don't. So it's like, I'm thinking, though, that it's going to probably be a deal where he ends up on the exempt list. He likely won't even get to play this year. But you never know. I mean, the league let Antonio Brown play last year when most people thought he would get suspended. So it's worth a shot, especially in super flex leagues where pretty much all the quarterbacks are picked up because you not only can get him off the wire, but if he plays, he's more than just some scrub off the wire. I mean, we know what Desean Watson can do.
Yeah, very talented. I mean, again, he's available in 84% of leagues. Some of the 16% where he's owned are probably going to be your super flex leagues or your deeper leagues. And so, but take a look. It's worth a flyer. This is how you get an edge in fantasy football. You act a week ahead of everybody else. And so I do think it's worth looking to see if Desean Watson could help you in your specific situation. Before we get into DFS, we did have a couple of questions in the comments we want to get to. Spencer, what do you see there?
Yeah. First one, should I trade a Lockett for Michael Pittman and Darnell Mooney? So to answer your question, Mark, I would say, I would go ahead and do that. I feel like Pittman and Lockett are pretty close in value, especially with the Seahawks offense struggling. And plus you get Mooney as depth. And I mean, the Bears offense isn't very effective, but I feel like he's a decent depth piece considering he's actually outpaced Allen Robinson so far this season. So while Lockett, you could argue, is the best player in the deal, I normally don't advocate for trading a guy that's the best player in the deal. But I feel like Pittman's right there with him. It's like splitting hairs. And then you get Mooney to sweeten it. So I'd take the Pittman and Mooney side.
Yeah, I like Pittman, and I like that trade, especially because the Russell Wilson situation's uncertain, right? And even when he comes back, the Seahawks are 2-5. I mean, at some point they get buried, and at some point they become one of those teams where any little injury is, I'll just sit the guy down. Let's not risk it. We're we're 4-8 anyway, or whatever the case is. I mean, I really think Seattle's a situation that if you can trade out of it and get pretty good value, I do like that deal. Another comment from G. Moeller. What do I do with Julio Jones? Interesting. He's in Tennessee, and people had high hopes of the change of scenery, but just hasn't been that productive.
Right. Yeah, I'd look to trade him if you can before he ends up with another hamstring injury. He's become basically just hamstrings Julio. I mean, every week it seems like he's battling a hamstring problem. So I would say try and trade him if you can. That's definitely not droppable. He's still productive enough where he's worth a roster spot, probably even a flex play most weeks. But he's a big name, so there's probably a good chance you could get decent value in return for him, like a Michael Pittman. Someone might not be as familiar with Michael Pittman. Julio, because Pittman, he's had a strong start, but he could have some untapped potential, being that the Colts offense is on the rise. So I would say don't panic with Julio, but also look to trade him if you can get good value.
Another name I'll throw out as a potential trade partner for Julio would be Jerry Judy in Denver is supposed to be back this week. And maybe you catch an owner by surprise who doesn't realize Judy's back or thinks, well, he's been hurt and who knows, and maybe I'd rather have Julio. And I like Judy going forward in a deal like that.
Yeah, I could see that. Because Judy will be the featured option where, like, with the Titans, of course, got King Henry, and then A.J. Brown's really emerged as of late. So, yeah, I don't think there's quite enough to go around for Julio to be his old self. Being out in Atlanta, he was such a target hog. He just needs more of a compliment now in Tennessee.
And Julio, you just never know the next time he's going to pull that hammy. It's been an issue for 3 years now. I don't trust it. I didn't draft him. So, yeah, I would try to get rid of him if you can. It's not that he has no value, but go and see what's out there. This is the Fantasy Roundup on bet.nola.com. We're brought to you by Caesar Sportsbook. Moving on to the daily fantasy portion of our show. We got some DFS values for the week. And, Guru, you like a Bengals stack. It certainly would have worked out last week. You think it may work out again this week?
Yeah, I think it could, because I feel like against the Jets, it's a perfect opportunity to cash in on the Bengals, and especially Joe Burrow. And his value went up to 7,100, but it's still a pretty good price. I mean, because he's not up there with the likes of Allen, Mahomes, and Murray. So if you don't want to pay the ridiculous price for one of them, you can get Burrow at a decent price. And I like T. Higgins as the guy to stack with him. Normally I'd say Jamar Chase, but after his breakout 200-yard performance, his price skyrocketed. He's now up there among the top receivers, where Higgins' price still very reasonable there at 5,200. So I like the Burrow-Higgins stack in an exploitable matchup this week. And then Darrell Henderson at 6,500. I know we both had him on our list the past couple of weeks, and I have him again this week because I feel like he's just not getting enough respect, considering he's the lead back on a really good Rams team, and they get another cupcake matchup this week against the Texans. So while last week they did more of their damage through the air after falling behind early, I feel like this week will be more of a Henderson week. I would think they'll get up early over the Texans. And then Robert Tonyan at tight end, with Adams and Lazard out, this presents an opportunity for Robert Tonyan to really do work on Thursday night. Rodgers got to throw to somebody. We had mentioned Randall Cobb, maybe MVS coming back, but I think Tonyan's a name that could be a daily lineup winner at tight end, considering he's a good value on top of it.
Yeah, that Thursday night special slate in daily fantasy will be fascinating because of the absence of Adams and Lazard. And so, you've got to pick the right Packer, right? Because somebody's got to get the ball. So do you pick Tonyan? Do you pick Randall Cobb? MVS coming off of injuries? It'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting daily slate there on Thursday night. I have a stack for you, too, on my DFS suggestions for the week. And mostly this is just a value pick, but for $11,000 total, I can get Carson Wentz and Michael Pittman. Colts Titans, it's a huge game for the Colts, probably a must-win if they fancy themselves a contender in the AFC South. And so I do think they'll pull out some stops. Carson Wentz has looked better and better. Throw out Sunday night because of the rain in San Francisco, but he's looked better over the past few weeks. You can get him for just $5,700. Pair him with Michael Pittman. The Titans, as well as they've played, number one receivers can feast on the Tennessee Titans. And Michael Pittman's turning into a number one receiver, so I like that. And I went with a Bengal also, but I went with Joe Mixon. He's priced up a little bit, but he's still a good $1,000 or more below that tier of Jonathan Taylor, Alvin Kamara. Dalvin Cook plays on Sunday night, but even Dalvin Cook in the main slate, certainly Derrick Henry. I like Joe Mixon because we talked about this a few minutes ago, Spencer. The Jets can't stop the run, and the Bengals presumably are going to have a lead. And so I really like Joe Mixon here. And then another sort of matchup play here, Tyler Higby, still talented. He's been down a little bit. He started slow. But against the Houston Texans, they don't defend the tight end very well. And so I do like Tyler Higby this week as well.
Right, yeah. Higby's had kind of a mess start to the season. But, yeah, this could be a good launching point for him with the exploitable matchup. And they like to throw it there in L.A. with Stafford and McVay. So this could be a decent Higby week. And
so the upshot there is you take some of these guys, and then you can afford a Derrick Henry or a Patrick Mahomes or I was going to say Devonte Adams, certainly not him this week, but a Cooper Kupp. Yeah. I mean, you get some of these values, and then you pick your superstars, and that's how you win at DFS. So we're hopeful those values come in for you. Here on the Fantasy Roundup, it's going to be a tough week for fantasy football again. We thought we were through with Bye-Mageddon, but now the Packers situation, a COVID outbreak, still dealing with some bye weeks. So we want to talk some sleepers. Who are some sleepers who could get you through either waiver pickups, trade for them, start them if you've had them buried on your bench all year? Spencer, we went back to that Packers situation here.
Right, yeah, assuming he doesn't test positive for COVID, I would say Randall Cobb. Yeah, because with receivers, it might be a contact tracing thing. So, yeah, keep a close eye to make sure that Cobb actually is a go. But assuming he is, then he's definitely worth a play this week, I feel, because with no Lazard and no Adams, we had mentioned it earlier, Rodgers has to throw to somebody, and while Tunyon could be in the mix and possibly MVS there. I'm sure they're hoping that MVS could come back, but with him coming off of IR is kind of uncertain. They might want to ease him back in. And, we all know Cobb. I mean, he got the familiarity with Rodgers. That's who Rodgers specifically requested this offseason to end his holdout. He was like, I'm not coming back unless y'all trade for Randall Cobb. So, I mean, this is the week to show why Rodgers is pounding the table for Randall Cobb. I mean, so you could see a little turn back the clock action here. And it's just one of those things where Cobb isn't an elite talent anymore, but just off of volume, I think he'll have a good game this week.
Yeah, I mean, somebody's got to catch the ball. I know we keep saying that, but it's true. Aaron Rodgers is not going to throw for 82 yards against the Cardinals. He's going to throw for more like, they don't throw as much as they used to, but he's going to throw for certainly more than 200 and probably close to 300 in a game that could turn into a shootout. Aaron Jones is going to get some of that. Robert Tunyon's going to get some of that, but there's got to be a receiver in there as well. I like Hunter Henry facing his old team in the Chargers. The Chargers have not defended the tight end very well. The Patriots have two good ones, but Jonnu Smith is banged up. Henry's caught touchdowns 2 weeks in a row. Would not be surprised if he makes it 3 in a row.
Right. Yeah, he's the Jonnu potentially that could really boost Henry's stock, because right now he's kind of on that fringe tight end one borderline thing with with having to split time with Jonnu. I generally avoid 2 tight end systems, but it's a good matchup, like you said, and with Jonnu banged up, yeah, I could see Henry having a really nice week this week.
Yeah, man, if you're in a bye week situation, you have a couple of choices, and Henry is one of them. I do recommend him as a sleeper for this week. If you've got questions, we answered a couple of them earlier, but you're free to look out for Spencer on Twitter or Instagram. He's at Spencer the Guru. He's happy to help. Reach out to him on social media anytime, and we will answer some of those questions on the Fantasy Roundup as well. And by the way, I got to shout it out, Spencer. You and I both won week 1 of the Guru Fantasy Basketball League. So we're going to have some fantasy basketball content trickling in as the NBA season really gets rolling. And we are both 1-0, so we'll keep an eye on that. Do you know what week we play? We got to look that up.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure when we match up. Yeah, we'll have to hype it up for sure.
I'm going to look that up. We got to have the grudge match session on Fantasy Roundup here. Hey, we're with you every Tuesday on the Fantasy Roundup, and here on bet.nola.com, we hope you join us for all of our weekly shows. We are live Monday afternoon with Odds and Ends, Tuesday afternoon with the Fantasy Roundup, and Thursday afternoon with At the Book to preview the betting weekend. All of them Really good stuff. We're going to start getting some guests in, and we are brought to you by Caesar Sportsbook. And again, you can download the Caesar Sportsbook app now in Louisiana. Go to NOLA.com/Caesars to get our exclusive bonus, a $100 free bet when you deposit money before the mobile betting launch. We expect that to be before the end of the year. So get there now, get some money in your account, be the first in line to bet when that app goes live. It's going to be fantastic. Can't wait. And I'm pumped up. So week 8, Spencer, hopefully a little bit easier than week 7 for fantasy football managers.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, anyone that is able to survive the crazy week 7 should be good for week 8, and y'all can go check out my latest column. Got some waiver wire recommendations plus a few things I learned from that crazy week.
That's right. You can read Spencer's new column today on bet.nola.com. He is live with a new column every Tuesday and Thursday, and maybe a few other times when he feels like it, maybe some fantasy basketball stuff trickling in as well. So we thank you for joining us here on the Fantasy Roundup. That is Spencer the Guru Urquhart. I'm Zach Ewing. Our producer is Patrick McGee, and we will see you next time.